So, Pokemon, Detective Pikachu. Um, this film relies quite a lot on the nostalgia to carry, to carry an audience here. I mean, yeah, it's been going strong for 20 years. Kids still dig the game. It's been around long enough that a lot of adults remember the game. That you can do something that's maybe a little bit more adult that might appeal to adults. And also to present something a little bit different here. It's just like a shame though is that some of that nostalgia, I think it kind of like brings over some of the stuff I kind of didn't like about Pokemon as well with the movies. Because here's the deal, like Detective Pikachu, it starts off with a pretty interesting concept. It starts off by establishing Rhyme City as this sort of like utopia where humans and Pokemon have learned to band together. They no longer have like the Pokemon battles. They're no longer pitting them against each other in these like leagues and tournaments. And I thought, well, that's actually kind of a cool concept. It seems kind of like kind of like a progression on what like Pokemon used to be. Because I initially had that thought with the first Pokemon movie. Because there's a scene in the first Pokemon movie where they're watching like all like these clone Pokemon and like the true Pokemon battle each other, and they're all having like a sorrowful battle, and Nurse Joy is saying, Pokemon were not meant to fight, not like this. I'm like, how are Pokemon supposed to fight? It seems kind of like silly like that. So thankfully we don't have to deal with that aspect. We get to see this great city where Pokemon and humans have learned to work together in this utopia. No Squirtles will like put out fires, and you'll have like Machamps that'll direct traffic and all that. There's just Pokemon just milling about here. Now, an easy comparison that I know a lot of people are going to say with this is that it's going to be like Who Framed Roger Rabbit. And for the first act, yeah, it pretty much is kind of like Roger Rabbit. You have this city entirely comprised of like CGI created Pokemon, and humans just milling about and just working together with each other. Some don't like Pokemon, some work well with Pokemon, some like to leave Pokemon in the past, or they kind of look down on them and despise them. Some of them see them as like the next evolutionary step or what have you. But you also have like a detective story going on here. You have Tim Goodman is kind of a bit of a young adult who's kind of had a troublesome past with his father. Tim here is played by Justice Smith. And he can't really enjoy this city because he's still grieving over the death of his father, who died in a mysterious car crash. And he had a bit of a troubled history with his dad. He didn't quite see eye to eye with him. He lost his mom at an early age, and he's just been distant from him, and he just feels like he's just like denying a part of his past here. So there's a surprising somber tone to like the first half of this film that kind of like brilliantly established kind of like this neo-noir setting. Like we get to see Rhyme City at night with Pokemon just milling about. Like, there's neon signs. There's like a little bit of like a slowdown here where you kind of like take in the aesthetic. It kind of feels like you get to kind of get a little bit of Blade Runner vibes here and there. But then Tim ventures into his dad's apartment, and all of a sudden he has like a lot of questions. Like, what he finds like a strange vial of gas, and it's like, what is this doing? And all of a sudden he's attacked by a whole bunch of Pokemon. It's like, why did that happen? And then there's a Pikachu milling about his apartment, and the Pikachu is voiced by Ryan Reynolds, and apparently only Tim can hear this Pikachu for some strange reason. Now, apparently, this Pikachu also has memory loss, and he's got a gut feeling that like maybe his dad isn't dead. Maybe like that doesn't seem like there's enough clues. It doesn't seem like there's enough evidence here to substantiate that Tim's dad is dead. And so the two of them decide to team up and track down clues to find out what really happened to Tim's dad. Now, like I said, for like the first act, maybe about the first half of the film, it's a pretty fun detective little take here. Like I said, it's mostly at night. They go to like the little dark corners of Rhyme City. Like they question a Mr. Mime, which is probably one of the funniest scenes in the film by far. They venture into an underground Pokemon battle den where they have cage matches where battles are illegal. So they hold these kind of like fights of like gambling and stuff like that. All those little aspects are pretty cool. It's only once we start unraveling the mystery and actually, and actually like discovering what the real evil scheme here was, that unfortunately the film really does fall back into its, into the kind of like the weird logic of the Pokemon movies, where it feels like rules will just be made up on the spot. They try to make it with a whole bunch of like aha moments, like oh, you thought you thought this guy was the bad guy, no, it's this guy. Or it's like, oh, you thought it's like, oh, like you don't know what happened to Tim's dad. Well, here's what really happened. And here's what really happened with the Pikachu, and here's a secret Pokemon and stuff like that. But I think the biggest aha moment is that this film, for like the first half, masquerades as a detective film, and then by the end, it just turns into just like a typical adventure. Like they pretty much like abandon the whole like night setting and the whole like neo-noir aspect, and like for the last half of the film, it's pretty much just just like just screaming and running and twists revealed and psychic powers and explosions and battles on skyscrapers and all that, and of course it's entirely during at day. And so you kind of have like this muddled aspect to the film. It also, I think another thing that really hurts the film too is that it feels so manic in its dialogue to really force through to really get like this plot going, that there aren't a whole lot of moments to just slow down and breathe and take in the character here. Like Tim Goodman is mostly just kind of like a bumbling character. He's kind of meek and terrified, but he's got to face these dangers. Pikachu here, voiced by Ryan Reynolds, is pretty much just Ryan Reynolds being Ryan Reynolds, because like I said, only Tim can hear this Pikachu, and so Ryan Reynolds is mostly just playing off of him, and it's mostly just Ryan Reynolds doing commentary, and not a whole lot of great commentary. I was surprised how many lines are just kind of like thuds. They're kind of like that's kind of funny, but it's kind of like passive commentary. It's kind of like low key Reynolds. Now, I don't want people to be confused. I'm not saying like I want like to have like the Ryan Reynolds that we had in Deadpool, where he's just cussing all over the place and has tons of profanity. No, yeah, although apparently they recorded a whole bunch of lines that could be made into an R-rated film. But I just wanted some more of that great commentary in there, because especially when you get to that third act, it gets really ridiculous and silly with this villain scheme that I really wanted Reynolds to lay in thick here. I wanted to have like that one moment where in Deadpool 2, where he just turns to the camera and says, "That's just lazy writing." Just one little moment of that, or just one time where he would like comment on the villain, saying like, why can't you hold Nakatomi Plaza hostage like a regular supervillain or something like that. Just a little something like that, because it feels like they push him further and further into the back. I mean, I know he's the title character, but we really don't get a whole lot of funny lines out of him. I was surprised by how little he has. Don't get me wrong, that there are some smile-worthy moments with him. There are a few funny little bits here and there, but he just doesn't feel all there. It's also kind of like some of the supporting cast is kind of ridiculous. It feels like they're trying to ham up their roles just a little bit so that they stick out quite a bit here. In particular, you have this ally who accompanies Tim, Lucy Stevens, who's played by Catherine Newton, and she's apparently a reporter. But like I said, she really kind of plays up that reporter aspect, especially for the neo-noir part of the film, where she just lacks that typical fast talker reporter who rattles off lingo. But then, but she's also a bit of a bumbler too, where there's kind of a little bit of a ridiculous nature to her, where it was hard to buy her. It almost there are a lot of scenes like this where it feels like the actors are kind of playing dress up here. Where I almost wouldn't be surprised if Lucy just kind of slapped on a fedora and a little press sleeve in her hat like that. Because it gets that ridiculous. Because later on you have these G-men who show up and the suits and sunglasses, and I'm just looking at them just this looks silly. This looks like they're playing dress. I know it's meant to be intimidating. I know it's not meant to be too serious, and it's meant to be for kids. But it feels strange that they have these silly aspects to it that are almost kind of tongue-in-cheek, and then they have these kind of darker, somber moments, which I actually feel like are some of the better scenes in the film. There's a great scene where Tim and Pikachu are just kind of just taking a breather, to take in the gravity of how much Tim's father meant to him, and it's a very small scene, but it's pretty effective. There's another great scene where they're both wandering through the woods with Bulbasaur and all these different magical Pokemon that are milling about, and it's kind of like a little bit of a refreshing breather from some of the more manic dialogue that happens throughout the film. But then it, like I said, it goes straight back into that manic dialogue, like right away. So you're getting like bits and pieces of different parts of films that are actually that are pretty neat to look at, but you don't really take them in as much. Uh, I mean, don't get me wrong. Like, Justice Smith does a pretty good job as the Bumbler. I mean, Ryan Reynolds is putting in, the expected work here. Ken Watanabe is kind of fun. He's barely in the film, but he brings an earnest to his character. I like that though. I like that there's an earnest nature to most of the older actors, where they're kind of taking this seriously. So they're being very professional about this. So like Ken Watanabe is taking this role very seriously as a police lieutenant. Then you have Bill Nighy as kind of the founder of Rhyme City, who's kind of bringing this distinguished nature to, like, saying like I studied Pokemon for years and stuff like that. We believe him. I mean, it's Bill Nighy, the way he talks. You kind of believe him in that aspect. So I mean, the film is maddening. I mean, there are bits and pieces that kind of work as like a detective film, as an action blockbuster, as kind of an atmospheric, kind of like urban fantasy, as kind of like a little bit of like a mad scientist twisty story type going on here. Like little bits and pieces of this film work, but as a whole, it's frustrating that it never really comes together. Especially like I don't know, maybe I expected too much out of a film called Detective Pikachu, that it should actually feel like a detective film, especially for that first half of the film where it does feel like a neo-noir urban fantasy detective film. I wish it had the guts to stick with it instead of just, retreating back to what Pokemon usually does in these movies, where they have some ridiculous over-the-top villain who wants to rule the world somehow, and he's got to have Pokemon to do it. And it's usually some ridiculous and messy scheme here where a lot of like the emotion kind of gets lost in like the big action and like the twisty nature of it all. So it's a little bit manic, but I mean it's colorful. It's got some funny scenes here. There's a few scary scenes here where it might not quite be for kids. I would probably say maybe for I'd probably say maybe for kind of like older kids, maybe 8 or 9 or up, somewhere around there, they might dig it more. Because I mean, I know there was like a lot of questioning initially if this film would even be for kids, because it's got like this kind of like dark neo-noir style. Because like I said, there's that Roger aspect again too. Because you look at Roger Rabbit, and you think like, wow, this is kind of like almost kind of like a straight detective story throughout most of it. So it's like, could it be for kids? But yeah, it's essentially it's still for kids, even though it's involving like a murder mystery type deal here. Especially because like it's way too silly in parts. Like I said, there are some great somber moments here. There's some great refreshing breathers here. And even when embracing the neo-noir style, that's only for about half the film, and then for the second half, they just turn on the lights and just like, okay, here's the big VFX showcase. Here's all these big Pokemon battles and explosions and scaling skyscrapers and running along crumbling cliffs. Like, okay, here's some more like palatable blockbuster content here. Which is a bit of a shame, because I honestly think there's a lot of potential here to actually make a neo-noir detective film work, but I feel like I've only gotten half that film here, unfortunately. So for Pokemon, Detective Pikachu, 2.5 out of 5 stars.